Hello there, and welcome to this tutorial on masking techniques for non-conventional surface shapes. If you've ever used Façade before, which I'm going to go ahead and assume you have to some extent since you're viewing this video, you probably know that it's a system that is really great for square or boxy surfaces. Even the masking tools that they provide simply only allow you to edit the image you want for, you guessed it, squares. There is a tool in the updated version that allows you to make surfaces appear more like a circle, so if that's something you're really interested in, the drop down is right here. So first things first, I'll be showing you both the Façade system on the desktop I'm using, as well as real-time recorded video of the surface I'm mapping to in order to give you the best idea of how the system works. It should be noted that I'm running a multi-projector design through the system right now, so if you're just working with one projector, don't mind the extra screen, or if you do have two, make sure that you have them set up to either be extensions or mirrors of the desktop, depending upon your needs. This is really important when you get into flipping images on surfaces, which I'll show you a little bit later. So we'll go ahead and start up a new project, and we're going to call it Façade Demo. Once we get that typed in, we'll click Save, and then click Set 1 Q1. I typically just click on the box to the side to start editing. I'd like to point out before we go any further that Façade has added a wonderful quick key guide to the system, which makes this process go so much faster. I recommend you take a look at it and get to know some of the really convenient tools like A for add, escape for exit to full screen, or even F for flip, W for warp, and M for move. All these will become extremely useful when we get into editing later. So without further ado, this particular project, as you can see, I was working on a box-like surface, but it had rays cut out of it. I wanted to put a singular surface over the entire box, but as you can see, it bleeds through onto the back wall. I would like to note here that it's easier to map in a dark space, but if you need to see the differential between two surfaces in their depth, I recommend some kind of backlighting if you have it available. I had strip lights at my disposal from the show design, so I just put that up in the back to help me and you see the surfaces separately. Now, Façade has no built-in method for dealing with this non-conventional shape you see before you on the back, at least in terms of masking or covering the areas that are bleeding onto the back wall. There is a cropping ability, but once again, it only crops, you guessed it, in squares. Luckily, Façade allows the user to make as many surfaces as an individual desires. This allows us to essentially trick the system into doing what we want. So whatever your surface is on has to be on the bottom or integrated first so that you can layer over top of it. Then you can go in and create one new surface for each spot you'd like to mask. I'm going to do each of the masking surfaces one by one on this side of the projection surface so that you can see each of them being done and shaped through warping. So I'll add a new shape with A, press M to make the box movable and shift it, and then I'll press W to warp the surface for all of my needs. At this point, I'd like to take a moment. You can keep watching the mapping while I talk. I'm going to point out that there are some flaws to this loophole in the system. The best you can hope to achieve in masking shapes is something close to a triangle, but it won't be perfect. Make sure you create a shape that allows something with 4 points of manipulation to cover it. What I mean is that because Façade creates boxes, you only have 4 points on each surface. So you can only mask using those 4 points as a tool for manipulation. It should also be noted that sometimes these points can put up a bit of a fight because they don't like to overlap over each other. It will take a bit of work to find the best angles, but in the end, it's definitely worth it. This is a good moment to point out that you should always save your program. Façade has no fail-safe when it comes to saving the program that you're working on. So make sure that every time you do a set, every time you do a couple different changes in your cues, and especially before you close down the Façade program, always, always, always save. Okay, now that we're finishing up this side, I'm going to go ahead to the other side now, but this time I'm going to create the big surface, and then I'm going to plot in all of the extra surfaces I need at once before stretching them. So instead of adding, then moving, and then warping each individual surface each time, I'll just go in and add all of the surfaces and then move them and warp them individually for what I need. So while I go about moving and stretching the surfaces, I'd like to point out that before you start, your projector, or whichever media source you're using, should be locked down as tightly as possible to deter it from shifting in the future. We found through the run of our show that the projectors kept sliding down due to movement on the poles they were fixated to, which meant that I had to keep redoing the masking because the angles of the projectors in the particular shape I had mapped to kept creating these gaps in the projection surface. It's also important to point out that you should take a moment at the end of this design to check the extreme angles of viewing to make sure that you don't leave any bleeding across the back. With non-conventional shapes, you may have to live with some bleeding, but you shouldn't have to live with all of it. Though the masking surfaces are a bit imperfect, to the visual eye, at least from the front angle, you should be able to remove almost all of visual bleeding onto the back wall. And I'm just going to quickly finish up this shape below. I did do this in real time so you get an idea for how long it takes in order to do each of the mapping surfaces. It doesn't take that long once you get used to it, but it can take a good bit of time. So now that we have our surfaces in place, we can import our images. You can choose whatever video or image you want, but I'm just going to go ahead and import a black image for our masking pieces, some clouds because they're really bright on the back, and then a video effect of colors. So we're going to go back to our surfaces near where I showed you how a surface could change into a circle. You should see a drop down for your media choice. You will need to remember which surface is which, otherwise you might do a lot of trial and error. I know that my two main surfaces are 0 and 5, so I'll make both of them clouds. See how the clouds still kind of bleed through? That's because the rest of my masking surfaces are currently transparent. So what we'll do is we'll go in and all those extra surfaces we have, 1 through 4 and 6 through 9, we'll set them for that black image that we imported in the media. And ta-da! The masking is complete. Since Q1 is still selected in the player, you shouldn't have to worry about not seeing the changes immediately on your projection surfaces. But if you happen to be editing or creating Q2, but the player is still in Q1, the changes won't appear until you force Façade to change to Q2. See how I changed the media, but it stays the same in the player? So I'll have to go over and manually click for the set in Q to change to 2. See how it changed? Now remember when I talked to you about flipping surfaces? You may not want to do it for every image, but if your non-conventional surface is like mine and you want them to mirror each other, just go back into the editor and click on the surface and press F. It's as easy as that. Keep in mind though that if you flip one image in a set, all of them will be flipped for that set. This is great if the image is always the same, but can be a pain if you're using different images. However, I found simply putting an image into Paint or Photoshop and flipping the image horizontally and then re-uploading it to Façade worked just as well. Keep in mind that I'm about to switch the video, but I didn't really show real-time editing for these last few changes I'm going to make. But you can see the bleed over and the editing that I'm doing for it. It looks a lot better after I've switched to this angle and done some of the edits. It looks a lot more crisp. Now I had to go onto the floor in order to check the angles, and then I had to come all the way back up to the computer in order to make the changes. It's a bit tedious, but getting it right for the first cue means that it's going to be right for the rest of the cues in the set. So make sure you save your program, and then that's it. So get out there and start masking your non-conventional shapes.